Welcome to my topic, fibroid. And this is A. Asha Christina, nursing tutor, Department of Medical Surgical Nursing, Faculty of Sri Balaji College of Nursing, Bharat Institute of Higher Education and Research, Chennai. Now we'll see the introduction of uterine fibroids. Uterine fibroid is a leiomyoma. It's a benign or non-cancerous tumor formed from a smooth muscle tissue that originates from the smooth muscle layer of the uterus, that is the myometrium of the uterus. Fibroid range in size from seedlings, undetected by the human eyes, to a bulky masses that can distort and enlarge the uterus. In extreme cases, multiple fibroids can expand the uterus so much that it reaches the rib cage and can add weight. So it is undetected by the human eyes, and when it is very small in size, when it grows, the fibroid grows, then there is a changes in the female body. The female can experience a fullness of abdomen or a bloating or a discomfort, and she will feel the pressure of, in the lower abdomen, and she may feel the frequent of urination. Then it can be detected by the diagnostic measures, or it can be detected by the MRI, CT scan, or some other imaging techniques. Then synonyms, myoma, leiomyoma, fibromyoma, and most common benign neoplasm in the female. And the incidence is 20 to 40% of reproductive age group. And this is what we are seeing is the types of uterine fibroids. This first is pedunculated submucosal. It is in this first there is a pedunculated submucosal. This is like a mushroom, because here it is attached, the thin straw like it is attached in the uterine wall, and an extension is like a roof of the mushroom. Then this is a pedunculated subserosal. This is attached in the outside of the uterine wall. This is in the this types of fibroid is intramural, and this is subserosal. And this fibroid is submucosal. These are the types or classification of uterine fibroids. Next, we'll see the definition. Uterine fibroids are non-cancerous growth of the uterus that often appears during childbearing years. Uterine fibroids aren't associated with an increased risk of uterine cancer and almost never develop into cancer. We'll see the incident. Most common, it is 77% specimen of hysterectomy were having fibroids in variable number. Size is micro or macro, and site. Sonographic survey in 35 to 49 years age, Afro-American women reported fibroids in 60%, and while about 80% among the women lesser than 50 years of age. White women have lower prevalence, 40% at the age 35 and almost 70% by the age 50. And now we'll move on to the etiology. It arises from smooth muscle cells of the myometrium. This exact etiology is not well known, and monoclonal origin arising from the single cell. And third is genetic basis definite. Under the epidemiological risk factors, it's increased risk. Those who are more prone, or those who are increased increased risk are age 35 to 45 years. Those who are more than or between the 35 to 45, they are more prone to get this uterine fibroid. And nullipara or low parity. And Black women, strong family history. Strong family history means they have the family history of uterine fibroids for the mother or for the relation. Then obesity, increased weight, overweight, early menarche, attaining the puberty or menarche before 12 or 11 years of age, and diabetes, and hypertensive females. And those decreased risk, and those who are in decreased risk are increased parity. And exercise, those who are having good habits of exercise every day, and increase intake of green vegetables, and progesterone only contraceptives. Next, genetic basis. Under the genetic basis, they're responsible for 40% cases of fibroids, a translocation between chromosome 12 and 14. Next, trisomy 12, and the rearrangement of short arms of chromosome 6, the rearrangement of long arms of chromosome 10, and last is deletion of chromosome 3 or the deletion of chromosome 7. These are some of the genetic bases where the females are more prone to get uterine fibroids. Although not proved for causing myoma, definitely implicated in its growth, not detected before puberty, and regresses after menopause. It may increase during the pregnancy, and common for decades due to an ovulatory cycle with high or unopposed estrogen. And we'll move on to the pathology. And this leiomyoma are usually multiple, discrete, and either spherical or irregular lobular. And this their pseudo capsule usually clearly demarcated them from the surrounding myometrium. They are clearly differentiated from the surrounding myometrium because the color is lighter than the layer of the uterus. And last point, they can third point is they can be often easily and cleanly nucleated from the surrounding myometrial tissue. On a gross examination, in a transverse section, they are buff colored, rounded, smooth, and usually fine. And generally, they are lighter in color than the myometrium. As we saw before, so it is lighter in color and it is round, smooth, and usually it is hard to touch. Next, when a fresh specimen is sectioned, the tumor surface projects above the surface of the surrounding musculature, revealing the pseudocapsule. And it is more common in nulliparous or women of a low parity. Next, we'll see the types of uterine fibroid. Depending upon the site and location of the fibroids, the classification is based. So the types are, first is submucosal fibroids. In this case, the fibroids are growing inside the uterine cavity, where a baby grows during the pregnancy. Think of the growth extending down into the empty space in the middle of the uterus. So in this submucosal fibroids, as we can see here, this submucosal fibroids, here this is a submucosal fibroid. In this, as the embryo when the embryo come down and embedded in the uterine cavity, as the same way it's growing here. So the female may feel the female will have the feeling of pregnancy or enlargement or growing of a uterus. So and there is a fullness of a uterus, and when the female will feel. Next, intramural fibroids. These fibroids are embedded into the walls of the uterus itself. As we can see the intramural, so it is intramural fibroid. This fibroids is embedded in the walls of the uterus. The fibroids are growing inside this muscular wall. Here the fibroids are growing, see the fibroids are growing inside the muscular wall. And next is subserosal fibroids. So subserosal fibroid, which is located on the outside of the uterus. These fibroids are connected closely to the outside wall of the uterus. So in this case, the fibroids are attached outside of the uterus. So the female will feel the bloating, and she may feel the fibroid. So next is pedunculated fibroids. This is this pedunculated fibroid is a least common type. These fibroids are also located on the outside of the uterus. So as we see, we saw in the subserosal fibroid, same it is located outside of the uterus. However, pedunculated fibroids are connected to the uterus with a thin stem, like a mushroom. They are often described as a mushroom, like because they have a stalk and then a much wider top. So, as a mushroom, the stalk is attached to the uterus, and the extension is like a roof of the mushroom. So, it is pedunculated fibroids. We'll see the risk factor. Those who are more prone to get this fibroids, first is obesity and higher body weight. A person is considered obese if they are more than 20 percentage over the healthy body weight. And second is the family history of fibroids. As we saw previously, the family history, if their mother, grandma, or their father's relation or mother's relations, females, if they are having the history of fibroids, then they are also more prone to get the fibroids. And not having children, then early onset of menstruation. That is attending a menarche before 11 years or before 10 years. So early onset is also one of the major risk factor for this late age of menopause. In this next, we'll see signs and symptoms. First is the excessive or painful bleeding during menstruation, and then bleeding between two periods. So means between two periods means between the two menstrual cycle, there is a flow of bleeding. A feeling of fullness in a lower abdomen, bloating. A female may feel the feeling of fullness or bloating. And the pressure symptoms, she may feel the pressure over the abdomen. So frequent urination, this can happen when a fibroid puts pressure on the bladder. So the female will urinate frequently with a few quantity, and she cannot able to complete her bladder because of the pressure. Next, infertility. So the female is more has more prone to get infertility. Then painful during sexual intercourse. Then low back pain. The female may feel will have a low back pain because of a growing of fibroids in the uterus or multiple fibroids. If the fibroid is larger in size, then the the abdomen will be large. So the female will lean towards. So automatically there will be a low back pain. The constipation, chronic vaginal discharge will be there, inability to urinate or completely empty her bladder. As I said, because of the pressure over the bladder. Abdominal distension, that is enlargement of the abdomen. Next, we'll see the causes. There are many causes behind this. First is genetic changes. So many fibroids contain changes in the genes that differs from those in a normal uterine muscle cell. So genetic changes is one of the major causes of this uterine fibroid. Next is hormones. So the estrogen and the progesterone, these two hormones that stimulate development of a uterine lining during each menstrual cycle in preparation for the pregnancy, appear to promote the growth of the fibroid. So when this two hormone is very essential for the growth of the endometrial layer or the preparation of uterine wall for the pregnancy. When if these two hormones will control, then there may be there may be a chance for the shrink of fibroids. And third is fibroids containing more estrogen and progesterone. So this estrogen and progesterone receptor that normal uterine muscle cells do. So fibroids tend to shrink after menopause due to decrease in hormone production. So after the menopause, there may be a decrease production. There is a decreased production of this two hormones, and because of this decreased production of hormones, there may be a shrink of fibroids. Other growth factor, substances that help the body maintain tissue, such as insulin like growth factor, may affect fibroid growth. Next is extracellular matrix. This is a ECM. It's extracellular matrix is the material that makes cell stick together. So like mortar between the bricks. So this ECM is increased in fibroids and makes them fibrous. So this extracellular matrix also store growth factor and cause biological changes in the cells themselves. So this is also one of the causes. Next, we'll see the abdominal examination. So for the first, we'll see the bimanual examination reveals uterine irregular enlargement. So if there is a fibroids in the uterus, there is the examiner may feel the irregularity of the uterine walls. So there is maybe a bulge or mass or tenderness of the uterine walls. Second, uterus is not felt separated from the swelling, and as such, bruise is not felt between the uterus and the mass. So next is third is the cervix moves with the movement of the tumor felt per abdomen. Next is pelvic examination. So in this pelvic examination, feel is fine more toward hard, maybe cystic degeneration. The margins are well defined except the low pole. Nodular may be uniformly enlarged. So mobility is restricted from above downwards, but can be moved from side to side. So the mobility is restricted. So when pelvic examination, there is a movement of the this enlarged fibroid from side to side. Then percussion, while on percussion, the swelling is dull. This next we will move on to the diagnosis. So the uterine fibroids are frequently found incidentally during a routine pelvic examination. So when the female come with a complaints of abnormal uterine bleeding, pain, and a feeling of fullness in the lower abdomen, and urinary incontinence, or infection, urinary tract infection, or some of such complaints, then they may undergo some of the diagnostic tests like ultrasound. It uses sound waves to get a picture of the uterus to confirm the diagnosis and to map and measure fibroids. So the ultrasound device, that is a transducer over the abdomen, transabdominal, or place it inside the vagina, that is a transvaginal, to get an image of the uterus. So in this ultrasound, transabdominal ultrasound and transvaginal ultrasound is there. So in the transabdominal ultrasound, the device is kept over the abdomen to assess the size of the uterus, and transvaginal, through the vagina, they may assess or measure or evaluate the size of the uterus, or the abnormal changes. And lab test. This includes a complete blood count, that is CBC, which is to determine anemia because of a chronic blood loss, and other blood tests to rule out bleeding disorder of thyroid problems. So this CBC is prescribed because to detect the amount of a blood loss and level of a HB of the female, and to treat and to give the management according to that. Another imaging test, then first is magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. This imaging test can show in more details the size and location of the fibroids. So identify different types of tumors and help determine appropriate treatment options. And MRI is most often used in women with a large uterus, or in a woman approaching menopause or pre-menopause. So this MRI technique is used to identify or to detect appropriately the size of the fibroids and location of the fibroids, and single or multiple fibroids. So this is very helpful to identify exactly. Next is hysterosonography. This hysterosonography, also called a saline infusion sonogram, because saline is infused in this technique. So uses sterile saline to expand the uterine cavity, make it easier to get images of submucosal fibroids and the lining of the uterus in the women. attempting pregnancy or who have heavy menstrual bleeding. So in this hysterosonography, the saline is infused inside the uterus to expand the uterus and for the clear view of the growth of the fibroids and the location and site of the fibroids. And hysterosalpingography. This hystero means the uterus and salpingo means fallopian tubes. So this hysterosalpingography uses a dye to highlight the uterine cavity and fallopian tube on X-ray images. It may recommend it if infertility is a concern. This test determines fallopian tube are open or are blocked and can show some submucosal fibroids. Next is hysteroscopy. This small lighted telescope called a hysteroscope insert through cervix into the uterus. So this injects saline into the uterus, expanding the uterine cavity and allowing to examine the wall of the uterus and the opening of the fallopian tube. So next we'll see management. In this survey, management, we'll see the medical management, surgical management, and nursing management. In this first medical management, gonadotropin releasing hormone antagonist. This medication called gonadotropin releasing hormone antagonist treats fibroids by blocking the production of estrogen and progesterone, progesterone, and ultimately menstruation stops and there is a fibroid shrinks and anemia often improves. So this hormones, this medication reduce the blood flow and block the production of estrogen and progesterone. Ultimately, when the estrogen and progesterone will block, then there is a shrink of fibroids, and there may be a chance of reduce of the size of the uterine fibroids. Next is progestin releasing intrauterine device. A progestin releasing intrauterine device can relieve heavy bleeding caused by fibroids. A progestin releasing intrauterine device provides symptoms relief only and does not shrink fibroids or make them disappear. It also prevents pregnancy. Then tranexamic acid. This non-hormonal medication is taken to ease heavy menstrual period. It can be taken only on heavy bleeding days. Other medication. Some of the other medications, for example, oral contraceptives can help control menstrual bleedings, but they don't reduce fibroid size. Non-steroidal and anti-inflammatory drugs. This non-steroidal and anti-inflammatory drugs, which are not hormonal medication, may be effective in relieving pain related to fibroids, but they don't reduce bleeding caused by the fibroids. Next is surgical management. In the surgical management, abdominal myomectomy, an open abdominal surgical procedure to remove the fibroids in case of multiple fibroids, very large fibroids or very deep fibroids. Next is hysterectomy. The removal of uterus remains the only proven permanent solution for the uterine fibroids. The hysterectomy ends the ability to bear the children. So this hysterectomy is the permanent solution for the uterine fibroids. Next is uterine fibroid embolization. In this, a small catheter is placed in the uterine artery or radial artery, and the small particles are used to block the flow of blood from the uterine arteries to the fibroids. So the loss of blood flow shrinks the fibroids, improving the symptoms. So in this uterine fibroid embolization, they will block the blood flow from the uterus to the fibroids. So automatically the growth of a fibroid may shrink. And radio frequency ablation. In this RFA, that is radio frequency ablation, this is a safe and effective treatment for women with a symptomatic uterine fibroids and can be delivered by laparoscopic, transvaginal or transcervical approaches. Next, we'll see the complications of uterine fibroids. First is menorrhagia, second abdominal pain, premature birth, labor problems, miscarriages, infertility. Next, leiomyosarcoma, twisting of fibroids. anemia, urinary tract infection, a C-section may be needed. Some pregnant women need fibroids, have heavy bleeding immediately after giving birth. So we'll move on to the nursing interventions. The nurse determines what the experience means to the patient and encourage her to verbalize her concern. So the main responsibility of a nurse is to encourage the verbalization of the patient, and she should be very concerned regarding the patient and the care and the towards the patient. Next, explanation are given about physical preparation and procedure that are performed. So the responsibility of a nurse is to give a explanation, give a proper and perfect and correct explanation regarding the procedure. The nurse need to approach and evaluate each patient individually in the light of this factor. And a nurse who exhibit interest, concern, and willingness to listen to the patient's fear will help the patient progress through the surgical experience. So the nurse should show the interest toward the patient and the patient's well-being and how the patient is what curing, and regarding the surgical everything the nurse should give attention toward the patient to bring a good patient outcome. The nurse assess the intensity of the patient's pain and assess the patient with the analgesia as prescribed. So the nurse should assess the patient's pain every day. So she should verbalize or she should ask the patient regarding pain, and she should measure according to the pain scale, and management should be taken according to that. The nurse counts the perineal pad used, assess the extent of saturation with the blood, and monitor vital signs. So she should count the perineal pad, how much per day the patient is changing, and the amount of bleeding. Then the vital signs should be monitored, because to count the saturation level and blood pressure, and if any infection, the patient may have an increased temperature. So the responsibility of a nurse is to monitor vital signs. And abdominal dressing is monitored for drainage if an abdominal surgical technique was used. If there is an abdominal technique is used, then she should assess for a surgical site or any wound drainage or infection or pain, whatever. She should give attention toward that to prevent from further infection or septicemia. The nurse should instruct to contact the nurse or a surgeon if bleeding is excessive. If there is increased bleeding, should intimate immediately to prevent the further complication. Then patient is encouraged and assisted to change position frequently. So this is done because to prevent the patient comfort, to promote the patient comfort and to prevent the bed sore and back pain. Next, the nurse helped the patient to ambulate early in the post-operative period. So the responsibility of a nurse is to ambulate the patient, because to assess whether the patient is comfortable, patient can walk, or patient can sit by herself. So this is the responsibility of nurse to help the patient to ambulate. Intake and output chart is monitored. So it is necessary to monitor the intake and output chart. Next, explain the patient about follow-up visit. Give a proper explanation regarding the medications and when she has to come again and visit the visit. If in home, if any other complication or any other abnormalities, if the patient is having in a physically, she should come and meet the physician. So every explanation should be clearly given to the patient so she should clear the doubt of the patient too. Encourage verbalization of feeling. So the patient and the nurse should encourage the verbalization of the patient, so she can give the management properly according to that. Monitor active fluid loss from wound drainage bleeding. Next, encourage patient to drink prescribed fluid amount, because to prevent the dehydration and to improve the nutritional level and everything. So monitor serum electrolyte. So she should monitor the serum electrolyte. Next, encourage client to increase fluid intake. As I said, the responsibility of a nurse is to encourage the fluid intake. Next, the observation of changes in mental status, behavior, or level of consciousness. So then, the role of a nurse is to observe the patient consciousness, behavioral, and mental status, whether the patient is comfortable or confused or tensed or have angry, depressed. Everything a nurse should assess and should give a good psychological support to improve the psychological condition of the patient. Note the catheter patency was settled. The she should assess the catheter patency, whether when using the catheter, whether it is located in a proper site or it is dislocated, or any infection or everything she should assess. Assess nutritional status, including weight, history of a weight loss, and serum albumin. So the nurse should assess the nutritional status of the patient. If the patient is gaining weight or drastically reducing the weight, everything she should assess. And encourage intake of protein and calorie rich food. The patient, she should encourage to take a protein and calorie rich food, because because it helps the patient to fast cure of a surgical site or tissue repairing. It helps in tissue repairing. Next, help in developing effective coping strategy. Next, we'll see the nursing diagnosis. First, acute pain related to post-operative wound as manifested by facial expression and pain scale score. Second is imbalanced nutrition less than body requirement related to pain as manifested by decreased food intake. So there is the imbalanced nutrition in the patient because of decreased intake of a patient. A third diagnosis is impaired bowel elimination, constipation related to decreased activity, pain, or straining. So next is disturbed sleep pattern related to pain and hospitalization. So risk of infection related to surgery, low self-esteem related to changes in femininity as evidenced by